Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The divorce papers hit our kitchen table with a soft thud that might as well have been thunder. I stared at the manila envelope, my name printed in block letters across the front, and felt my world tilt sideways. This couldn't be real. Eli wouldn't actually go through with it. Would he? "Mummy, what's that?" Lila asked from her spot at the breakfast bar, her spoon halfway to her mouth, milk dripping back into her cereal bowl. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just some boring paperwork." I forced a smile and quickly slid the envelope under a stack of bills. "Finish your breakfast or you'll be late for school." But it wasn't nothing. Deep down, I knew this moment had been building for months, ever since Eli started questioning my friendship with Mark. Ever since he'd grown cold and distant, watching my every move like I was some kind of criminal. I mean, what was I supposed to do? Eli worked 16-hour days, came home exhausted, and barely spoke to me except to ask about dinner or Lila's homework. Mark actually listened when I talked. He made me laugh. He reminded me that I was still interesting, still worth paying attention to. Was that really so wrong? The whole thing started innocently enough. Mark Linwood had been my best friend since high school, and when he moved back to town last year after his divorce, it felt natural to reconnect. We'd grab coffee, catch up on old times, text throughout the day about random things that made us smile. It was harmless. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. "Vesper." Eli's voice cut through my thoughts as he walked into the kitchen, already dressed in his usual uniform of khakis and a button-down shirt. His dark hair was perfectly combed, his expression unreadable. "We need to talk." "Can it wait? I need to get Lila ready for school and then head to work." I busied myself with packing Lila's lunch, avoiding his eyes. "No, it can't wait." His tone was firm but quiet, the way he always spoke when he was trying not to upset our daughter. "Ruth called this morning." My stomach dropped. Eli's mother had been suspicious of my friendship with Mark from the beginning, always making little comments about how much time we spent together, how often my phone buzzed with his messages. Ruth Harrow was a meddling old woman who needed to mind her own business. "Oh, great. What did your mother have to say now?" I couldn't keep the irritation out of my voice. "She saw you at the cafe by the lake yesterday. With Mark." Eli's jaw tightened. "You told me you were working late." Lila's spoon clinked against her bowl as she looked back and forth between us, her 7-year-old mind trying to process the tension crackling in the air. "I did work late," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Mark stopped by the office and we grabbed a quick coffee afterward. Since when is having coffee with a friend a crime?" "Since you started lying about it." The accusation hung between us like a slap. I felt my cheeks burn with indignation. How dare he accuse me of lying? I wasn't doing anything wrong. Mark and I were just friends. Close friends, yes, but friends nonetheless. "I'm not lying, Eli. I'm just tired of having to justify every conversation, every text message, every moment I spend with someone who actually wants to be around me." The words came out sharper than I intended, and I saw Lila flinch. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means maybe if you paid half as much attention to me as you do to your computer, I wouldn't need to find companionship elsewhere." Eli's face went pale, and for a moment I felt a stab of guilt. But then I remembered all the lonely evenings, all the times I'd tried to talk to him about my day, only to get distracted nods and one-word responses. "Daddy?" Lila's small voice broke the silence. "Are you and Mummy fighting?" "No, sweetheart," Eli said softly, moving to her side and smoothing her dark hair. "Mummy and Daddy are just having a discussion. Why don't you go get your backpack? I'll drive you to school today." As Lila scampered off, Eli turned back to me. His brown eyes, usually so gentle, were filled with something I'd never seen before. Disappointment, determination. "Is there anything else you need to tell me, Vesper? Anything at all?" I looked at my husband of 9 years, this man who'd loved me through college, through the early struggles of building our careers, through the sleepless nights when Lila was a baby. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, about the long conversations with Mark that stretched late into the night, about how special he made me feel, about the growing distance I felt from my own marriage. Instead, I laughed. "Oh, come on, Eli. You're being paranoid. Mark is like a brother to me. We've been friends forever. If you can't trust me with my oldest friend, then maybe the problem isn't me." Eli stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in his expression, something that looked almost like resolve. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe the problem isn't you." 3 weeks later, I sat across from Mark at our usual table by the window at Lakeside Cafe, venting about the growing tension at home. The autumn sun cast golden light across his face, highlighting the laugh lines around his green eyes. He was such a good listener, so different from Eli's distracted silence. "He's been watching me like a hawk," I complained, stirring sugar into my latte. "Checking my phone when he thinks I'm not looking, asking weird questions about my schedule. It's like living with a detective." Mark frowned, his fingers drumming against his coffee cup. "Maybe you should back off a little, Vesp. I don't want to cause problems in your marriage." "You're not causing problems. Eli's insecurity is causing problems." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "You're the only person who really understands me anymore." "I know, but—" Mark pulled his hand away gently. "People are starting to talk. My neighbor asked me yesterday if I was seeing someone new, said she'd seen us here together a lot." A flutter of panic rose in my chest. "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That we're old friends." He studied my face carefully. "That is the truth, isn't it?" "Of course it is." But even as I said it, I felt the lie stick in my throat. Because if I was being honest with myself, what I felt for Mark had grown beyond friendship. He filled a void that Eli had left empty, made me feel alive in ways I'd forgotten were possible. "Good," Mark said, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "Because I care about you, Vesper, but I won't be the reason your family falls apart." I wanted to tell him that my family was already falling apart, had been crumbling slowly for years under the weight of Eli's emotional absence and my growing resentment. Instead, I smiled and changed the subject to safer ground. Memories of high school, funny stories from work, anything but the complicated truth of what was happening between us. When I got home that evening, Eli was helping Lila with her math homework at the kitchen table. They looked up when I walked in, and I was struck by how similar their expressions were. Cautious, guarded. "How was work?" Eli asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Fine. Long day, lots of claims to process." I hung my purse on the hook by the door and kicked off my heels. "Sorry I'm late. Got stuck on a call with a difficult client." It wasn't technically a lie. I had dealt with a difficult client that morning. The fact that I'd spent the last 2 hours with Mark instead of at the office was just an omission. "Ruth called," Eli said, not looking up from Lila's worksheet. "She wanted to invite us to dinner this weekend." My stomach clenched. Ruth's dinner invitations were usually thinly veiled interrogations, opportunities for her to poke and prod at our marriage like a doctor examining a wound. "I might have to work this weekend," I said quickly. "Big case coming up." "On a Saturday?" "Insurance fraud doesn't take weekends off." I moved to the refrigerator, avoiding his gaze. "What's for dinner?" "Daddy made spaghetti," Lila piped up, her voice overly bright in the way children's voices get when they're trying to lighten a heavy mood. "With the sauce you like." "That's wonderful, baby." I kissed the top of her head, inhaling the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. At least one thing in my life still felt pure and uncomplicated. Later that night, after Lila was tucked into bed and Eli had retreated to his home office to work on some coding project, I found myself deleting my text thread with Mark. It had become a habit, this careful erasure of evidence. Not because I was doing anything wrong, I told myself, but because Eli wouldn't understand the innocent nature of our friendship. My phone buzzed with a new message from Mark. "Thanks for listening today. You always know how to make me feel better." I smiled and typed back, "That's what friends are for." But as I hit send, I caught a glimpse of movement in the hallway. Eli stood in the shadows, and I wondered how long he'd been watching me. "Everything okay?" I asked, quickly closing my phone. "Fine," he said, but his voice carried a weight that made my chest tighten. "Just getting some water." He moved past me to the kitchen, and I noticed he took the long way back to his office, the route that would take him past where I sat on the couch. When I looked up, he was staring at my phone with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Eli." "Good night, Vesper." He disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone with my secrets and the growing certainty that my carefully constructed world was beginning to crack. The confrontation I'd been dreading came 3 days later at my mother's house during our monthly family barbecue. The October air was crisp but pleasant, perfect for gathering on the back deck that overlooked Mom's prize-winning rose garden. Pauline Rivers had outdone herself with the spread: grilled chicken, homemade potato salad, her famous apple pie cooling on the kitchen counter. I was laughing with my cousin Jenny about some ridiculous story from her job when Ruth appeared at my elbow like a storm cloud in a blue cardigan. "Vesper, dear," she said in that saccharine tone she used when she was about to deliver a verbal knife to the gut, "I've been meaning to ask you about your new hobby." "Hobby?" I kept my voice light, but my shoulders tensed. "All that time you spend at the cafe by the lake. Such a lovely spot for coffee dates." The conversation around us began to quiet as family members sensed drama brewing. I could see Eli across the deck, his jaw tight as he watched his mother circle me like a predator. "I do enjoy a good cup of coffee," I said with a bright smile. "Maybe you should try it sometime, Ruth. I hear caffeine helps with memory problems in older adults." A few people chuckled nervously, but Ruth's eyes narrowed. "Oh, my memory is just fine. I remember exactly what I saw. You and that Mark fellow, looking awfully cozy for just friends." "Mark Linwood?" My mother appeared beside us, her face creased with confusion. "Honey, I didn't know you'd reconnected with Mark. How wonderful. He was such a sweet boy in high school." "Yes, we've been catching up," I said, shooting Ruth a defiant look. "It's nice to have friends who actually want to spend time with you." "Friends," Ruth repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "Is that what we're calling it?" The deck had gone completely silent now. Even the kids had stopped their game of tag to stare at the adults. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, not from shame, but from anger at being ambushed like this in front of my entire family. "I don't know what you're implying, Ruth, but I don't appreciate it." I stood straighter, channeling every ounce of righteous indignation I could muster. "Mark and I have been friends since we were teenagers. Just because your son isn't man enough to trust his own wife doesn't mean—" "Vesper." Eli's voice cut through my tirade like ice. He'd moved closer during my outburst and now stood just a few feet away, his face pale with humiliation. "That's enough." "No, it's not enough." I was on a roll now, fueled by weeks of pent-up frustration and the mortification of being called out so publicly. I'm tired of being treated like a criminal for having a friend. I'm tired of walking on eggshells in my own marriage because some people— I glared at Ruth. "Have dirty minds and nothing better to do than spread gossip." "Gossip?" Ruth's voice rose to match mine. "I saw you with my own eyes, holding hands across the table like teenagers, staring into each other's eyes." "We were not holding hands." The lie came out so quickly I almost believed it myself. "And even if we were, so what? I hug my friends. I touch people when I talk. It's called being affectionate, something this family could use more of." My mother stepped between us, her hands raised in a peacekeeping gesture. "Now, let's all just calm down. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Ruth said firmly. "That woman is having an affair, and everyone's too polite to say it." The word hung in the air like a bomb. Affair. Such an ugly word, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to face. How dare you, I exploded. How dare you accuse me of something so disgusting? Mark and I are friends. Friends. Maybe if your son paid half as much attention to me as you do, I wouldn't need to find emotional support elsewhere. I saw Eli flinch as if I'd slapped him, and for a moment, I felt a stab of regret. But I was too angry to stop, too committed to my performance of wounded innocence. You know what? I don't have to stand here and listen to this. I grabbed my purse from the patio table. When you're ready to apologize for insulting me and my friend, you know where to find me. I stormed toward the house, expecting Eli to follow me, to defend me, to choose his wife over his meddling mother. Instead, I heard him say quietly, "Mum, take Lila inside for some pie. I need a minute." When I turned back, he was standing alone on the deck, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, staring at the ground. The rest of the family had scattered like leaves in a windstorm, suddenly finding urgent reasons to be anywhere else. "Eli?" I called from the sliding door. He looked up, and the expression on his face made my stomach drop. It wasn't anger or hurt or even disappointment. It was something far worse. It was resignation. "I'll take Lila home," he said. "You can find your own way back." He walked past me into the house without another word, leaving me standing alone on my mother's deck, surrounded by the wreckage of what had once been a pleasant family gathering. Later that evening, after a tense drive home in my own car and an even tenser conversation with my mother about keeping the peace, I found a receipt in my purse that made my blood run cold. Dinner for two at Romano's Italian restaurant, dated last Tuesday, the night I'd told Eli I was working late on a difficult case. The night Mark and I had impulsively decided to grab dinner after our usual coffee, when conversation had flowed so easily that we'd stayed until the restaurant closed, talking about everything and nothing, feeling more connected than I had with another human being in years. I crumpled the receipt and threw it in the trash, but the damage was already done. If I'd found it, Eli could find it too. And if he was looking hard enough to find receipts, then my carefully constructed story was already falling apart. The call from HR came on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was settling into my cubicle at Midwest Insurance with my usual large coffee and the stack of claims that never seemed to get smaller when my phone rang. "Vesper Harrow, please report to Human Resources immediately." My stomach dropped. In 8 years with the company, I'd never been called to HR for anything more serious than updating my benefits enrollment. Janet Morrison, our HR director, was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who got straight to the point. "Vesper, we need to discuss your personal phone usage during work hours." My personal phone usage? I tried to keep my voice steady, professional. "Over the past 3 months, you've received an average of 15 personal calls per day, many lasting 20 minutes or longer. Additionally, your productivity has dropped significantly." She slid a folder across her desk. "These are the numbers." I stared at the spreadsheet, seeing my decline laid out in black and white. Mark and I had been talking more frequently, yes, but I hadn't realized it was affecting my work performance so dramatically. I've been dealing with some personal issues," I said weakly. "I understand that life happens, but this level of distraction is unacceptable. Consider this a formal warning. If your performance doesn't improve within 30 days, we'll need to discuss further disciplinary action." I walked back to my cubicle in a daze, Janet's words echoing in my head. How had I let things get so out of control? And more importantly, how was I going to explain this to Eli? The answer was simple. I wasn't. "They're restructuring the department," I told him that evening as we sat at the dinner table. "Janet's being a real hard-ass about productivity metrics. It's nothing personal." Eli nodded, but I caught him studying my face with that new intensity he'd developed lately. "Maybe you should look for something else, somewhere that appreciates your experience." "Maybe." I pushed food around my plate, my appetite gone. "How was your day?" "Fine." He turned to Lila, who had been unusually quiet throughout dinner. "How was school, sweetheart?" Mrs. Patterson wants to talk to you, Lila said in a small voice. About what? I don't know. She said I seem sad lately. Eli and I exchanged glances across the table. Our 7-year-old was picking up on the tension we thought we'd been hiding so well. You're not sad, are you, baby? I reached over to smooth her hair. Sometimes. Lila's lower lip trembled. You and Daddy don't laugh anymore. The simple observation hit me like a punch to the gut. When was the last time Eli and I had laughed together? When was the last time we'd had a conversation that didn't revolve around schedules or household logistics or carefully avoided topics? We're just tired from work, Eli said gently, but that doesn't mean we're not happy. We love you very much. I know. Lila's voice was barely a whisper. But do you love each other? The question hung in the air like smoke. I opened my mouth to give the automatic reassurance, but no words came. Across the table, Eli's face had gone very pale. Of course we do, I finally managed. Daddy and I are just going through a rough patch. All married couples do. But as I said it, I wondered if I was lying to my daughter or to myself. Later that night, after Lila was in bed, I found Eli in his office hunched over his computer. The blue glow of the screen cast shadows across his face, making him look older than his 36 years. I'm going to bed, I announced from the doorway. I'll be up in a few minutes. But he didn't look away from the screen. I started to leave, then turned back. Eli, are we okay? He finally looked at me, and for a moment I saw a flash of the man I'd fallen in love with. Vulnerable, hopeful, wanting to believe the best in people. I don't know, he said quietly. Are we? I wanted to cross the room, to put my arms around him, to tell him everything would be fine. Instead, I stood frozen in the doorway, paralyzed by the weight of all the things I couldn't say. Good night, I whispered, and fled to our bedroom. I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Rough day. Could really use a friend right now. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could hear Eli moving around downstairs, probably locking up and turning off lights. In a few minutes, he'd come upstairs and lie down beside me, and we'd maintain the careful distance that had become our new normal. Want to talk? I typed back. Call me when you can. I glanced toward the bedroom door, then made a decision that would haunt me for weeks to come. Give me 10 minutes. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store, talking to Mark in hushed tones about his problems with his ex-wife, his struggles at his new job, his loneliness in a town where he was still rebuilding his life. I don't know what I'd do without you, he said, his voice warm through the phone. You're the best thing about moving back here. You'd figure it out. You're stronger than you think. We both are. There was a pause. Vesper, I need to ask you something. What's really going on with your marriage? The question I'd been dreading, the one I'd been asking myself for months. It's complicated. Do you love him? I closed my eyes, leaning back against the headrest. I used to. I think I still do, somewhere underneath all the distance. But I don't know if love is enough anymore. And what about us? My heart hammered against my ribs. What about us? You know what I mean. I did know. I'd known for weeks, maybe months. The way he looked at me across our cafe table, the way our conversation stretched longer and deeper, the way I found myself thinking about him at odd moments throughout the day. Mark, I'm not asking you to leave him, he said quickly. I'm just asking you to be honest with me, with yourself. I sat in that parking lot for another hour, talking in circles around the truth we were both too afraid to name. When I finally crept back into my house, Eli was asleep, or pretending to be. I slipped into bed beside him and lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling and wondering how my life had become so complicated. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen making coffee, still in his pajamas. He looked up when I entered, and something in his expression made me stop short. We need to talk, he said. And I knew, with a certainty that made my knees weak, that my time was up. I know about the restaurant, Eli said without preamble, his voice eerily calm as he poured coffee into 2 mugs. Romano's, last Tuesday night. My mouth went dry. I can explain. Can you? He turned to face me, and I was shocked by how different he looked. Gone was the uncertain, hurt man I'd been living with for months. In his place stood someone I barely recognized, controlled, determined, almost cold. Because I'd love to hear how dinner for 2 at a romantic Italian restaurant equals working late on insurance claims. It wasn't romantic. Mark was having a hard time with his divorce settlement, and he needed someone to talk to. We just grabbed a quick bite. For 3 hours? The precision of his knowledge terrified me. How did you... Your credit card statement, which, by the way, is in both our names, so I have every right to see it. He slid a folder across the kitchen counter. Along with our phone records, your work schedule, and a few other interesting documents. I stared at the folder like it was a snake. You've been spying on me. I've been trying to save my marriage. There's a difference. He opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. 47 phone calls to Mark Linwood in the past month, some lasting over an hour. Most during work hours, which explains why you got written up by HR. How do you know about HR? Because I called them, told them I was concerned about you, that you'd been acting strangely, and I was worried about your job security. Janet was very understanding. Apparently, personal calls during work hours are a fireable offense if they continue. I felt the walls closing in around me. You had no right. I had every right. I'm your husband. Or at least, I was until I found these. He pulled out more papers, printouts of text messages, credit card receipts, even photos. Did you really think deleting your messages would make them disappear forever? Everything goes to the cloud, Vesper. Everything. My legs gave out and I sank onto a bar stool. The evidence was overwhelming, damning in its thoroughness. Months of careful deception laid bare in black and white. It's not what you think, I whispered. What I think is that my wife has been having an emotional affair with her childhood friend while lying to my face about it. His voice never rose above conversational level, which somehow made it more terrifying. What I think is that she's been using our daughter as an excuse to avoid family gatherings where she might be questioned. What I think is that she's been gaslighting me for months, making me believe I was paranoid and controlling when I was actually showing remarkable restraint. Eli, please, I'm not finished. He pulled out another document, this one official-looking with a law firm's letterhead. What I also think is that my wife has been so focused on her new relationship that she's forgotten we live in a no-fault divorce state, which means I don't need to prove adultery to get a fair settlement, but I can certainly use evidence of emotional abandonment and deceptive behavior when it comes to custody arrangements. The blood drained from my face. Custody? Eli, you can't be serious. You can't take Lila away from me over some text messages and coffee dates. Watch me. For the first time since this nightmare began, his composure cracked slightly. I saw a flash of the pain I'd been causing him, the betrayal that had been eating away at him while I convinced myself I wasn't doing anything wrong. She's my daughter too, I said desperately. I love her. I know you do, but loving her means putting her needs first, and you haven't been doing that. Her teacher called yesterday. Did you know Lila's been having nightmares? That she's been asking Mrs. Patterson if divorce means kids have to choose sides? Guilt crashed over me in waves. I'd been so caught up in my own drama, so focused on justifying my relationship with Mark, that I'd barely noticed my daughter's distress. I never meant for any of this to happen, I whispered. But it did happen. And now we have to deal with the consequences. He closed the folder and picked up an envelope I hadn't noticed before. I've been staying at my mother's house for the past 3 nights. I told you I was working late, but turnabout is fair play, don't you think? You left? You left me and Lila alone? I left you alone. Lila was at sleepovers, which you would have known if you'd been paying attention instead of texting your boyfriend. The word hit me like a slap. Boyfriend. Was that what Mark was? Had I really crossed that line without even realizing it? He's not my boyfriend, I said weakly. Then what is he? I opened my mouth to give the same answer I'd been giving for months. He's just a friend. But the words wouldn't come, because looking at the evidence spread across my kitchen counter, seeing the pattern of deception and emotional intimacy laid out so starkly, I couldn't pretend anymore. I don't know, I admitted. Well, you'd better figure it out, because I'm done being married to someone who's already checked out of our relationship. He handed me the envelope. These are separation papers. I've filed for temporary custody of Lila, pending a full hearing. You have 30 days to respond. My hand shook as I took the envelope. Eli, please, can't we try counseling? Can't we work this out? I tried to work it out. I tried talking to you, asking you directly what was going on. You lied to my face every single time. He moved toward the door, then turned back. I'll be back tonight to pack some things and talk to Lila. I think it's time she knew the truth about why Daddy won't be living here anymore. You can't tell her about Mark. I'm not going to tell our 7-year-old that her mother is having an affair, but I am going to tell her that sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love, and that sometimes the best thing to do is live apart for a while so everyone can heal. He paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, Vesper, I really did love you. I probably still do, but I love myself and our daughter more than I love the woman you've become. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone with the wreckage of my marriage and the terrible realization that I had no one to blame but myself. I sat at that kitchen counter for a long time, staring at the separation papers, before finally reaching for my phone to call the one person I thought would understand. Mark, it's me. Can you come over? I think I need that friend now more than ever. But even as I made the call, I wondered if it was already too late for friendship, and if I'd destroyed my family for something that might not even be real. The family courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and tired. I sat at a table with my lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman named Patricia Chen, who'd come highly recommended and cost more than I could afford. Across the aisle, Eli sat with his attorney, looking calm and composed in his best suit. Ruth was there too, sitting in the gallery behind Eli like a sentinel. She caught my eye once and gave me a look that could have frozen hell. My own mother sat behind me, her face a mask of forced optimism that didn't quite hide her disappointment. This is all just a misunderstanding, she'd said that morning over coffee. Once the judge hears your side, everything will work out fine. But I wasn't so sure anymore. The past 6 weeks had been a blur of legal meetings, custody evaluations, and painful conversations with Lila about why Daddy was living at Grandma Ruth's house. Through it all, Mark had been supportive but distant, clearly uncomfortable with his role in the dissolution of my marriage. I never meant for this to happen, he'd said the last time we talked, 3 days ago. Maybe I should testify, explain that nothing physical ever happened between us. No, I'd said quickly, it'll just make things worse. Because the truth was, something had happened between us. Maybe not physical, but emotional intimacy that had crossed lines I was only now beginning to understand. I'd given Mark pieces of my heart that belonged to my husband, shared thoughts and feelings and dreams that should have been Eli's to hear. All rise, the bailiff announced, the Honourable Judge Margaret Thompson presiding. Judge Thompson was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who wasted no time on pleasantries. She reviewed the case files with efficient precision, asking pointed questions about custody arrangements, asset division, and the reasons for separation. Mrs. Harrow, she said, fixing me with a steady gaze, I've reviewed the evidence submitted by your husband's counsel. Would you like to respond to the allegations of emotional abandonment and deceptive conduct? I stood on shaking legs. Your Honour, I never meant to hurt anyone. I was going through a difficult time in my marriage, and I sought comfort from an old friend. Perhaps I made some poor choices, but I love my daughter, and I've never been anything but a good mother. The evidence suggests otherwise, the judge said dryly. Your daughter's teacher reports significant behavioral changes coinciding with the deterioration of your marriage. Her grades have dropped, she's been having nightmares, and she's expressed anxiety about her parents' relationship. This suggests that your poor choices have had a direct impact on the child's well-being. But that's not my fault. The words burst out of me before I could stop them. Eli's the one who withdrew from our marriage. He worked all the time, never talked to me, made me feel invisible in my own home. If he'd been a better husband, I never would have needed to find emotional support elsewhere. The courtroom went very quiet. Even my own lawyer looked like she wanted to disappear under the table. Mrs. Harrow, Judge Thompson said, her voice ice-cold, are you seriously arguing that your husband's work schedule justifies your decision to engage in an extramarital emotional affair? It wasn't an affair, I protested weakly. 47 phone calls in 1 month, including late-night conversations lasting over an hour. Secret meetings at restaurants and cafes, deleted text messages and deliberate deception about your whereabouts. The judge consulted her notes. If this isn't an affair, what would you call it? I opened my mouth, then closed it again. What could I call it? Friendship? Support? A mistake? Furthermore, the judge continued, your response to being caught was not remorse or attempts at reconciliation, but rather public humiliation of your husband and continued deception. The court finds this pattern of behavior deeply troubling. Eli's lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my client is not seeking to deny Mrs. Harrow access to their daughter. He's simply requesting primary custody with generous visitation rights, given the evidence of emotional instability and poor judgment. I'm not emotionally unstable, I snapped. I'm a good mother. A good mother doesn't prioritize her emotional affair over her child's well-being, Judge Thompson said sharply. A good mother doesn't create a hostile home environment and then blame everyone else for the consequences. The words hit me like physical blows. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was supposed to explain my side, make them understand that I wasn't a villain, just a lonely wife who'd made some mistakes. Your Honor, my lawyer interjected, my client acknowledges that she made errors in judgment, but she's committed to rebuilding her relationship with her daughter and addressing the issues in her marriage. What marriage? Judge Thompson looked at me with something approaching disgust. Mrs. Harrow has shown no genuine remorse for her actions and continues to blame her husband for her own choices. This court sees no evidence of commitment to rebuilding anything. She shuffled through her papers one final time. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court awards primary physical custody to Mr. Eli Harrow, with Mrs. Harrow receiving supervised visitation every other weekend until she completes court-mandated counseling and demonstrates stable behavior patterns. Supervised visitation, I gasped. You're treating me like I'm dangerous. You are dangerous, Mrs. Harrow. You're dangerous to your daughter's emotional well-being and to the stability she needs to heal from this trauma. The judge's gavel came down with a sharp crack. This court is adjourned. I sat in stunned silence as the courtroom emptied around me. Supervised visitation, counseling, my daughter living with Eli and Ruth, while I got to see her like some kind of criminal under court-appointed supervision. Across the aisle, Eli was shaking hands with his lawyer, his face calm but tired. Ruth was crying. Tears of relief, I realized. They'd won everything they wanted. Vesper, my mother's hand touched my shoulder. Come on, honey, let's go home. But as I gathered my purse and followed her out of the courtroom, I realized I didn't have a home anymore. I had an empty house filled with the ghosts of the family I'd destroyed, a job I was probably going to lose, and a relationship with Mark that felt more like a burden than a blessing. Eli caught up with me in the parking lot, Lila's small hand clasped in his. My daughter looked up at me with confused eyes, and I felt my heart break all over again. Mummy, are you coming home with us? Not today, sweetheart, Eli said gently. Remember what we talked about? Mummy needs some time to work on herself, but you'll still see her lots. When? This weekend, I said, kneeling down to her level. We'll do something fun, just you and me. With a grown-up watching, Lila said matter-of-factly. Daddy explained about the supervisor lady. The casual way she accepted this new reality, that her mother couldn't be trusted alone with her, was more devastating than any legal judgment. I love you, baby, I whispered, pulling her into a hug that she returned with heartbreaking enthusiasm. I love you too, Mommy. Will you get better soon? Over her head, I met Eli's eyes. For just a moment, I saw not the cold, controlled man from the courtroom, but the husband I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. The man I'd hurt so deeply that he'd had no choice but to protect himself and our daughter from me. I'm going to try, I told Lila, and for the first time in months, I meant it. As they walked away, hand in hand toward Eli's car, I stood alone in the courthouse parking lot, watching my family disappear into their new life without me. My phone buzzed with a text from Mark. How did it go? I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Some questions didn't deserve answers. Some mistakes were too big to explain away. I got in my car and drove home to my empty house, where I would spend the next several months learning the hardest lesson of my adult life, that actions have consequences, that love requires more than just feeling, and that sometimes the price of getting what you think you want is losing everything that actually mattered. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Eli got the house, primary custody, and most of our assets. I got a small apartment, supervised visitation that eventually became unsupervised, and a long, difficult journey toward understanding the woman I'd become and the woman I wanted to be. Mark and I stopped talking entirely after the court hearing. Whatever we'd had, friendship, emotional affair, or something in between, couldn't survive the wreckage it had caused. He moved away 6 months later, and I heard through mutual friends that he'd remarried within a year. Eli never remarried, though I know Ruth tried to set him up with several nice girls over the years. He focused on raising Lila and building his consulting business, creating the stable, peaceful life he'd always wanted. The life I'd made impossible when I lived with them. As for me, I learned to live with the consequences of my choices. I rebuilt my relationship with my daughter slowly, painfully, earning back her trust one supervised visit at a time. I went to therapy, not because the court ordered it, but because I finally understood that I needed help understanding why I'd sabotaged the best thing in my life. It took 5 years, but eventually Lila started staying overnight at my apartment again. Eventually, she stopped flinching when I hugged her. Eventually, she began to forgive me for breaking up our family. Eli and I learned to co-parent civilly, professionally. We attended Lila's school plays and soccer games from opposite sides of the bleachers, united in our love for her if nothing else. He was never cruel, never vindictive, just careful, protective. He'd learned not to trust me with his heart, and I couldn't blame him for that. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd made different choices, if I'd talked to Eli about my loneliness instead of seeking comfort from Mark, if I'd fought for my marriage instead of fighting for my right to have a friend, if I'd put my family first instead of my own emotional needs. But wondering doesn't change anything. The papers were signed, the custody arrangement was final, and the life I'd built with Eli was over. All because I'd convinced myself that wanting something made it right, that feeling lonely justified any action, that love meant never having to choose between what I wanted and what was best for my family. I was wrong about all of it.